Hi all, it's Megan here from Little Food Explorers, just getting ready for today's session. So I'll just tell you a little bit about myself while we're waiting to get started. So I work for the public health team at Medway Council, have done for nearly 4 years now, and I come around all the children's centres or family hubs as they're now called to do all about introducing solid foods in a session called Little Food Explorers. So basically, normally I come in the session, cook some lovely bits for you all and answer your questions. But obviously at the moment that can't happen. So instead, I'm doing these lovely live sessions for you. So our session today is going to be mostly talking about choking risks, what foods can be deemed more of a risk for babies and even young children, and how we can present the food to reduce those risks, because there's no need in most cases to completely avoid the food. There's just ways we need to prepare it. So lots of foods can be choking risks right up until the age of 5, we generally say. So these skills you'll be learning today will hopefully help even as your child gets a little bit older. So it's not just for tiny babies from 6 months that we're talking about today. It's right up until they're 5 years old. And I'll also take some time to also answer your questions as well. So please feel free to start commenting those below, and I'll pop through and answer those as we go. So our first food we're going to talk about today is the one that we quite often hear about. So it's our lovely little grapes. So the biggest sort of issue with a lot of foods is the shape. So round, hard foods are quite easy for children to suck up and end up getting stuck. So the easiest way to deal with these is to cut them up. So when we first start, we'd normally cut them into quarters. We can cut into halves, but we always need to make sure we're chopping lengthways. So we're not chopping down the middle, we're chopping lengthways. And that just makes it smaller, and it makes it less of that round shape, which is obviously the issue of when it can get stuck. So grapes, absolutely fine for babies to have grapes from 6 months. They may find them hard to pick up to begin with, so they may be slightly easier once they start getting their pincer movement, which is around 8 or 9 months, so then they can pick up the little bits. But absolutely fine to introduce grapes as long as we are cutting them up. So, and as I said, we recommend chopping grapes right up until the age of 5. So there's even in lunch boxes, that sort of thing, we expect to see grapes cut, and they're quite nice because they don't discolour, they don't go too mushy or anything like that, so they're absolutely fine to chop up and serve in that way if you're going out for the day. So that's our grapes. So another food that is similar that parents don't always think about are blueberries. So again, you can get really big blueberries. These are from a punnet that I bought yesterday, and they are still, again, quite large and round. So we'd just be expecting to see those chopped again in half or into quarters, and soft and squishy. So we want them to be quite ripe as well when we're looking at blueberries. You can always squish them with a fork to mush them down as well. If we're putting them things in like breakfast cereal, things like that, you can mush them absolutely fine too. Mush them on some bread, on some toast, instead of using things like jam. But fine for children to have from 6 months. But I'd say right up until 5, we'd be looking at cutting those in half or squishing for small children, just to, again, minimise that risk of choking. So that's our blueberry. The other big culprit that lots of people talk about are our cherry tomatoes. So again, we're looking at the same thing there. We're cutting them into quarters, into little segments like that, and then it is absolutely fine for babies from 6 months to have. What lots of children do, and what my son still does, is mostly just suck the middle of the tomato out and leave the skins anyway. Still getting lots of yummy vitamin C, squishy tomato goodness there. So the other thing you can do is roast cherry tomatoes, and then they're nice and squishy. But if we're giving them raw like this, I'd want to see them in quarters. So that's our cherry tomato. Another big one for vegetables are our hard vegetables. So things like carrots, we want to be seeing cooked as much as possible. So giving raw carrot, again, to children who haven't quite got the ability to chew, is not the best idea. So I would always these have just been steamed in the microwave this morning, as we were talking about last week, how to prepare vegetables, and also serving in sticks and not in rounds. So we want to see, when we're first starting off, until your child has more of an ability to chew foods, we'd be seeing in sticks instead of rounds or chunks like this. So this can be anything. So things like like apples as well. I wouldn't suggest giving chunks of raw apple to children, especially starting out, until they're a lot older, just because of the risk of choking. If they break a bit of this off, again, it could end up getting stuck. So just giving it a few minutes in the microwave just to soften it, soft and squidgy, that's what we're looking for, and then perfectly fine for them to have. Another way you can serve carrot is grated. So nice little bit of grated carrot. It's another way to just serve some raw carrot up. So you can always grate that as you go as well. Really, really yummy on a sandwich with a bit of hummus and grated carrot. I have that for myself. Really good way to, again, offer a different texture for babies as well. That grated, it's picking up little tiny bits. It's just a new skill, a new experience for them. So another food we can look at are our dried fruits. So I've got a fig here. Again, it's quite squishy, but it could still break off into quite large chunks. So I just minimise the risk of that as much as possible by cutting it into smaller chunks to start with. So anything sort of like a dried apricot, anything that is quite large, round, and isn't quite squishy enough for them to be able to get on with, we'd cut that into chunks for them. So yeah, any of those dried fruits, just err on the side of caution, chop them up a little bit, and we don't want to really be serving dried fruit on their own anyway, because of our oral health for our teeth. So we want to be serving that with other foods anyway, so chopping them up and stirring them into breakfast cereals such as porridge, or serving them alongside other foods is always recommended. A food that people don't always think about is cocktail sausages and sausages in general. So again, round firm foods. So always good to be just think of it in that way. What shape is it? How firm is it? And we cut these into quarters, so lengthways into quarters. If we're giving this sort of food. So cocktail sausages in general can be quite high in salt. So again, I wouldn't recommend them until baby's slightly older. As part of a balanced diet, they shouldn't make up a big part of our diet. Even for us as adults, we should limit how often we have sort of the processed meat groups, but perfectly fine as an occasional food for children to have, but as a caution again for that choking risk. A few other things that we need to be cautious of are whole nuts. So things like, this is a little cashew nut here, got some pecan nuts as well. So just be extra careful there with those. We don't recommend giving whole nuts to children under the age of 5. So the way I would always present these is either chopped, or these have just been squished with a knife on a chopping board. So nice ground nuts. You can buy ground nuts as well. So we are they're round, they're hard, they're very hard for children to chew. So we would crush those, make it as easy for them as possible. You can stir those again into yogurts, into porridge, sprinkle them on top. They're a really good source of sort of our healthy fats and lots of other nutrient, like fibre, and even some source of protein and things in our nuts. So they're really good round food for us to have, but perfectly but yeah, make sure we're chopping or finely grinding those for children. So you can do that, squishing them with a knife, chopping them with a knife, or a rolling pin. And you can even get children involved in this, put them in a plastic bag, a good smash with a rolling pin to break it into lots of little pieces. And children obviously really enjoy that. It's a really good activity for them to do. So what else have we got? We have got cheese. So blocks of cheese like this. Again, very firm, very hard. So this is just some cheddar. I would always serve that grated. So some grated cheese there. Quite difficult for children when starting out, again, to chew and break off pieces of cheese. So yeah, I would grate that to start with. Obviously melt it, absolutely fine. Soft cheeses, so things like cream cheese, cottage cheese, are fine for children as well. But just be extra cautious with blocks and pieces of cheese. Just, break that up a little bit for them. So some things we don't really recommend for babies and children, as a rule, are our sweets and things like that. But it's also important to bear in mind that things like marshmallows and gummy sweets are also quite for children. So when they don't have that ability to chew very well, these are again still quite firm for them to try and handle in their mouths. So it's not just from we shouldn't be giving children too much added sugar, we shouldn't be offering these foods if they don't really need them. It also goes to that they're quite difficult for children to break down. So again, just avoid, and it's another reason, if you've got very well-meaning friends and parents who offer those sorts of foods to your children, to say, actually, no, they are a choking risk as well. So I'd rather them not have them. Another one at the moment, and I'm aware that, quite a few of us are having sort of indoor cinema nights, things like that, because we can't go out and about. But popcorn is another choking risk. Again, quite firm, quite difficult for children to chew. So, I'd avoid giving popcorn until you feel your child is more able to cope with it. So definitely, not within the sort of first year would I expect to be seeing popcorn. Really good healthy snack for us if we sort of have low salt, low sugar popcorn, no added salt, no added sugar. I know we had a recipe on our Try For You page a couple of days ago, that a family hack about popcorn. Really good to have, but not so much for babies and young children. So just, again, bear that one in mind if you've got it around the house at the moment. And yeah, so just a few other foods we don't recommend for sort of babies and children when we're first starting out. So this is more babies from 6 months. So the one quite often that parents forget is honey. So honey is recommended for children under the age of 1 due to the risk of poisoning from botulism toxin that can be found in honey. So basically, up until the age of 1, we just don't recommend giving children honey. After the age of 1, don't forget, it is still a source of sugar, although there's lots of ideas out there about it being a more natural source. It still makes our food sweet, and our babies are sweet enough, so we don't need to be adding honey to their food the same as sugar. Other things, so we need to remember our cheeses, so things like Camembert, blue cheeses that are sort of ripened, mold ripened cheeses can contain listeria, which is a type of food poisoning bacteria. So we don't recommend giving these raw to babies. You can cook them, so a cooked brie, cooked Camembert is okay, but we wouldn't give them raw, just due to the risk of listeria there. When we say soft cheeses, those are the sort of cheeses we mean. Sort of Philadelphia style soft spreadable cheeses are fine for babies and children to have. So what else is there? There's the unpasteurized milks and cheeses as well. So make sure they're always pasteurized. It tends to be sort of more expensive cheeses that are unpasteurized, or if you have a family friend who has a farm or something, you're more likely to come into contact with unpasteurized milk products. But generally, as a rule, they're pasteurized. Fish, so shark, marlin and swordfish are the three fishes that they aren't suitable for babies. Not ones that as a nation we have very often, but always important to just flag it up just in case at some point we're going to get to go on holiday. Some of these foods might be more regularly served in other countries, so shark, marlin and swordfish contain high levels of mercury, which can be quite damaging to small children and babies. So we recommend avoiding those fish completely, and sort of limiting how often we have tuna as well. So no more than one portion of tuna a week. That's fresh tuna. Tin tuna, it's about 2 tins of tin tuna, which is rather a lot for a baby or a small child anyway. So, but even as adults, we need to be cautious of how much of these fishes we would eat, just because of the risk of mercury poisoning as well. And in pregnant women, we would say to avoid shark, marlin and swordfish as well. So just something to bear in mind. As I mentioned briefly, not added sugar. So sweets, biscuits, cake, chocolate, we don't recommend for babies. They don't need it. So I always like to think of, we want children's diets to be as nutrient dense as possible. So if we fill them up on chocolate, sweets, cakes, biscuits, there's not a lot else in there apart from fat and sugar. So if we could give them a whole plate full of, colourful fruits, vegetables, some protein sources in there, some dairy sources, I'd always recommend doing that over cakes, biscuits, chocolates. Everything has its place. But if we're looking at our diet day to day, we want to make sure those things aren't a common occurrence, a sort of everyday food, if you will. We want to make sure, that they're there as part of a balanced diet. And we know children and young children tend to have preferences for these sorts of foods anyway, because they tend to be quite interested in our sugary alternatives. This is also sweetened food, so things like if it's non-added sugar, juices, squashes, those sorts of things, we need to still be cautious of this, because they will still have that sweet tooth from those sorts of foods. So yeah, that's that one. Have I missed anything? Oh, rice milk. No rice milk for under 5s. So rice milk can contain arsenic in very small amounts for us as adults, but again, smaller bodies, bigger effect. So we don't recommend any rice milks for under 5s. If you are giving any sort of milk replacements, then cow's milk, we'd look at other options such as oat milk, almond milks over rice milks. So that's just another little tip there. And tea and coffee. We don't recommend giving tea and coffee to small children. They don't need the caffeine in most cases. Children have plenty of energy. They don't rely on it like we do. And in the past, lots of families give their children tea, but tannins are found in tea, which actually can have an impact on our iron absorption. So we really don't recommend it for the caffeine or the fact that it contains these tannins, which can affect your iron absorption. The other thing is that we used to add lots and lots of sugar to our bottled tea that we used to give children when they were younger. Again, we don't recommend adding sugar to children's diets, so completely unnecessary. Finally, salt. So no add salt to children's food as much as possible, particularly in children under 1. So we try and avoid salt as much as possible in that age bracket. So it's not just the food, that we add salt to. So bear in mind things like bacon, ham have salt added, as I said earlier. Sausages, cheeses can as well in the process, and even bread, things like that. And don't forget, ready-made tomato sauces. Also, sauces can have salt, quite high levels of salt added to them. So where possible, make your own, make sensible choices, and it's all about that varied balance there. So, we're trying to make as much as possible. And I'm here to answer some of your questions if you'd like. So feel free to start pinging them through if you've got anything that you're not sure about, anything I've said or anything else you'd like to have covered. So I've had a question here about nuts. So we talked a little bit about allergies a couple of weeks ago, and I'll do another session on allergies in the next couple of weeks. But from 6 months, children can have nuts if there's no severe eczema or allergy risk within the family. So if you have any of those concerns, always go and talk to your health visitor or GP before introducing foods. Nuts tends to be one of our major allergens, as are milk, gluten and wheat, fish, shellfish and eggs. So they're always ones to bear in mind if there is a worry about allergens. And one of the major factors tends to be if a child has early onset eczema that they have to have treatment for. So if you're seeing a GP about eczema, I'd always ask about allergies as well. Some children do have allergies, so we learn about allergies quite early on for things like milk allergies. If a child is having formula or even in some cases mum's breast milk, we might pick up on a milk allergy. But when we start to introduce foods, introduce any of the allergens one at a time on their own or with foods that baby has already been okay with. And then, wait a few days before introducing another allergen. Once we've introduced an allergen, we keep offering that food to just make sure we're building up that immune response. So it's not good enough to just introduce food once, then be fine and just go, oh, that's okay. We want to just keep regularly having these foods within their diet on a regular occurrence. Nuts, as I said, I would recommend crushed or chopped, or in a peanut butter or something like that, in an almond butter. Much easier for babies to, we're talking about choking risks. It eliminates that choking risk as much as possible to give it in that form. So, a little bit of nuts alongside something they've already had. And we would normally see an allergy quite rapidly with things like nuts. If you have any concerns, if baby starts struggling breathing, any funny rash, like that, either 999 or 111, depending on the severity of the situation. In our current times, the health service is still there to help us. So if you do have any concerns, please reach out to those people, and they should, point you in the right direction. If a child does have an allergy, there is evidence that says they're more likely to have other allergies as well. So, if your child does ever have an allergic reaction to something, make sure you do tell a health professional so you can get some support going forward. And there's lots of really good information on Allergy UK and on the NHS website about if your child does have an allergy, what to do next. So hopefully that will help with that. But yeah, I'm going to be doing a topic about allergies in the near future. So feel free to keep an eye out for that, because it's a massive topic, and it's obviously a concern for lots of parents, particularly at the moment when we feel everything's a bit more strained, and you don't want to cause any issues, but we still need to introduce those foods that are deemed possible allergens, because the earlier we introduce them, less risk it's going to be. There's been evidence that if we hold off introducing allergens, it can cause a bigger problem in the future. So introducing them from early on, from the 6 month introducing solids journey is really what we recommend. Just going to have a look here, see if we've got any more questions. Please feel free to pop through if there's anything you want to know. So just some more sort of around choking. So there's a massive difference between choking and gagging. So when baby first starts introducing solids, we might have concerns. You might have some families say, oh, he's choking, she's choking. Actually, they're gagging. So gagging is noisy. It's still not very nice. We don't want to see our child in discomfort, but baby's gag reflex is really far forward. So, and then they move it back. So that's why they put everything in their mouths. It's also a really big sensory organ for them as well, to be able to put things in their mouths. So even if they don't necessarily put food in their mouths to start with, you'll probably find they'll be putting toys in their mouths. So, don't be afraid to give them those opportunities, because they're moving that gag reflex further back, and that will help with swallowing and things like that as well. So giving that opportunity to move that gag reflex. So then gag reflex, as I said, it's noisy, and it is then working to bring the food back up, because wherever it is, it's uncomfortable. So it might be coughing, it might be being sick, it might be going a bit frustrated. And, once they bring that food back up, they might even try it again. They'll be absolutely fine afterwards. You might be a bit panicked. They'll look at you as if to say, what? So, giving them those opportunities are really, really choking, very, very different experience. So it tends to be silent. So one thing I always recommend is never, ever, ever leave your baby alone when they're eating. Try not to give them foods, if they're in a front-facing pushchair, if they're in the back of the car, those sort of places where you can't physically see them and you can't help them if they do struggle. And I also always say to parents that you have to remember to, the choking risk doesn't go away the day they turn 1. So always have good practice about them sitting down when they're eating. Make sure there's somewhere where you can see them, and making sure we're preparing the food correctly reduces that risk to the absolute level that we need it to, to make us all feel safe and confident. So we need to, take this seriously. But children will gag to start with in most cases. And as I said, sometimes it leads to them being a little bit sick, bringing some milk back up, bringing the food back up. But in most cases, they will not be put off by it at all, and they will be absolutely fine. It's just normally us who are a little bit more, oh gosh, that wasn't a very nice experience. And all children tend to gag slightly differently as well. So yeah, some are really, really, really noisy. Some will just have a little bit of a cough and bring the food back up. It also sometimes depends what the food is as well. But choking is very, very rare because we put all these things in place, and there's no evidence. There's been quite a paper that was published about 2 years ago by Swansea University that talked about the risk of choking isn't any greater if you do baby-led weaning, if you do puree spoon-fed weaning, traditional level weaning. So by doing the baby-led, you're not putting your baby at any more risk of harm if you follow the steps correctly and put things in safely. So we've had a little question here about how much water would you recommend a 6-month baby to have. So basically, we're just looking at small sips of water. So, we're not looking at ounces, we're not looking at bottles worth. It's just a few sips, because we don't want the water to displace the milk. So just make sure that, they have the opportunity to get used to water, that it's a new thing that they can try, a new drink they can have. And that's why I always recommend giving it in cups rather than bottles as well. Because, if you have a bottle, uses a bottle, they're more likely to guzzle it down thinking it's milk and not really take that break and just have a few little sips of water just to help the food go down, just to get them used to it. Babies don't need anything else other than milk and water. If we're introducing water after months, they can just have tap water. If for any reason you've been recommended to give your baby water before 6 months, that should be cool boiled water. So you should always boil the water before giving it to a baby that's under 6 months. The reason for this is that once they get to 6 months, again, the risk of food poisoning, those sorts of things from water or any harmful bacteria affecting them in water has been lessened. They're putting more stuff anyway, they're coming into contact with more of those the bacteria and pathogens and stuff like that. So their bodies are more ready to cope with them. So there shouldn't be any issue with them just having normal tap water from 6 months. But if they're younger than 6 months, then we'd always give cool boiled water. So, got any more questions? So, let's have a little check. Okay. If you have got any more questions, feel free to pop them through. Next week, I'm going to be talking about how to build your baby's plate. So what foods would we expect to see on there? What foods would we, to make a nice balanced meal for a baby? What foods would you expect to see? So looking at those different food groups and some suggestions from each of those food groups to make a yummy plate of food. So I'll be here again next week at 2:00 to talk more about that. Probably have a couple of little recipes to share with you as well afterwards, as I did with our bread recipe last week. I hope some of you managed to make a few of those breadsticks. If not, you can look back. We did share that recipe last week for a lovely little breadstick recipe suitable for babies, for dipping in different foods, dipping in soups and hummus and things like that. So keep an eye out for that on the page. And the event for next week's session will go live at 3:00. So make sure you pop that you're interested on there. Make sure you pop if you're coming, and it would be good to see you all again next week. So yeah, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. As I said, the inbox is always open if you have any questions after the session, and if you have any other advice you want that you didn't feel comfortable posting in the comments, you can always contact me through there. So I'll see everybody next week, same time. Bye. Let me go off.